Hello everyone and welcome back to Championship Sunday here at Masters Tour Seoul, where it is win or go home. We have one more elimination match coming up in just a moment between Zhym and Un33d, one of the remaining mages in the tournament against the only surviving rogue.
It's true, and on top of that, this is also somewhat of a team kill in terms of the French players facing off against each other. I did get the chance to talk with Un33d, Zhym, and Falcine a little bit, and they were a bit upset that the three of them were all on one side of the bracket, but it does guarantee that there will be a French player, at least one, in the top four.
Yeah, the performance of the French community in this tournament has been incredible. You know, we often talk about just regions, right, and how well Europe is doing, how well America's doing. France alone is just is virtually dominating this tournament.
The half of the top 8 is just French players, and it really goes to show that their community, despite maybe being a little bit more closed off to the rest of Europe, I suppose. I mean, I generally notice that they have a lot of strong players, but they tend to stick within themselves, but they're now really showing that it is a force to be reckoned with, and it's interesting to see which of them could possibly take home this whole tournament.
This is a tough situation, I think, for Un33d in particular. This, I do think, is a strong matchup for him. Un33d is, as we mentioned, the lone remaining rogue in the tournament, and the performance of rogue throughout the tournament has been excellent against mage, but unsurprisingly poor against warrior.
Right.
And the winner of this matchup does go on to face Dead Draw, who is the remaining control warrior player in the tournament. So a tough situation for Un33d. He lost to Dead Draw in the first round of the double elimination bracket yesterday, and even if he does win this, which I believe he is favored to do, he's going to have to tackle Dead Draw once again.
Yeah, it really is, if you're a Falcine fan, a pretty good situation if everything goes according to the stats, because most likely the rogue is favored here and then probably loses to the warrior, which means that we are most likely to see a rematch between Falcine and Magoho, and Falcine did take a pretty convincing 2-0 in that one. However, if Un33d manages to not only win this first match, but find that way to take an unfavorable against the warrior, then suddenly Falcine is the one in trouble.
All right, well, let's take a look at the players who will be competing in this match. They are on the stage and ready to battle, as we mentioned, both hailing from France. It is Zhym and Un33d.
So Zhym and Falcine, if I'm not mistaken, had the same exact lineup, 34-30 cards, including the secondary and tertiary. And Un33d, you can see his performances dating all the way back to 2015, a bunch of DreamHack performances, and made it to some top 8s, and he's had, unsurprisingly, an amazing win rate versus Mage, and a similarly abysmal performance against Warriors.
Look at those stats. The over 80% win rate against Mage in this tournament, but just absolutely pummeled by Warriors so far, which is, as we're talking about, sort of the highs and lows of this rogue deck. Similarly, though, for Zhym, you know, the Mage deck, he's actually 4-0 against Priest, which is pretty remarkable.
It is.
But, you know, the relatively strong record against rogue so far, but that's a little bit surprising, I think, overall, given the general texture of how that matchup typically does play out. So, you know, perhaps the sort of text he has in his secondary deck may be responsible for giving him some of those wins.
I just find it really incredible that the 3 classes highlighted, which were positive win rates for Zhym, didn't even include Warrior.
Right.
And he's rocking Mage, which means most likely he's had a good win rate against Warrior as well. So Zhym probably is that type of player that knows how to find the outs, especially when playing Mage in the unfavorable.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the stats from the tournament over the morning before I came on to cast, and the Mage deck, sort of Mage as a class, was obviously the most popular deck in the tournament. Its only positive win rates from a class perspective were against Warrior and Druid. Every other matchup over the course of the tournament as a whole was negative for Mage. So, you know, I think that it stands to show how well the players who decided to bring decks to beat Mage, much like Un33d has done himself.
And you can already see in the opening hand from Un33d the fun inclusion of History Buff, which Hypno, a player that top 8'd at Vegas, was also bringing, which is just something nice to play on curve and has that upside of whenever you play a minion, buff something in your hand, and the nice targets for that include things like Deckhand and Leroy, which can then compound the burst potential for Rogue, which is so crucial against Mage.
Yeah, the History Buff is really interesting because, you know, getting some of your minions just to a little bit higher stat lines, right? Like, say, for instance, you get your Hench Clan Burglar up to 4 health. That means that it can't be just traded into by a Mummy plus and then the mummy kills something else as well. Similarly, just the 4 health on the history buff itself is actually like pretty nice against a lot of the common removal, like again Restless Mummy or Frostbolt or whatever else. So it's a pretty solid just tempo play in general that also happens to improve the power of the rest of your hand. I like that inclusion a lot.
Yeah, and I also really like pointing out this Fairy Dragon here. It is in the list to beat mages, and wow, what a draw off the top. Zhym getting this Zephyrus allows him to challenge the Fairy Dragon and have something proactive to do in the following turns. I do believe this would still just give Wild Growth, Animal Companion, and
I'm actually not sure. I wish we actually could see the Discover right here.
Yeah, a bit of a spectator issue.
The results for this often against a minion do include backstab, but that is a Fairy Dragon, can't be backstabbed. We do see Animal Companion is the pick, and a Pharaoh Cat found for Unid. Gonna go ahead and just play a 2-3 underbelly fence. Not gonna mess around trying to wait to get any Blink Fox or Burglar to enable that. Just wants to get the pressure on. Animal Companion here. Okay, that's medium.
I would say the worst of the 3, I think, because Huffer gave the potential to clear off the board entirely, and Misha challenged a remaining 2-3 much cleaner than Leok does.
It's true, though. This also does give Zhym a minion on the board that Unid can't just immediately get rid of as well. Obviously, this gets in some damage if he just goes face with the fence here, but this could give him a better opportunity to take out the history buff before he gets buffs off of it.
Yeah. So Zhym here could just continue the very clean curve he's had so far by playing down a Twilight Drake, but the Leok is not able to kill anything on board, and this is where it starts to get a little bit scary because the Rogue then has access to powerful swings like Henchland Burglar into Vendetta starting turn 4. Not quite in hand yet for Unid, though.
That's actually a really nice draw. Pharaoh Cat into Sap here gives 2 buffs from history buff and gets the big minion off the board and just allows Unid to keep pushing some damage here. Oh, he finds a Restless Mummy. Wow. That's a really good draw. If Zhym is planning on fighting back in this board at all with minions, that Restless Mummy, as we've seen in the Warrior match, is going to make that difficult.
Ziliax here.
4 power Ziliax.
Yeah. That's actually a very, very good use of the Leok here. And I do agree that he was meant to go face with those because the Leok threatened very little. The only rush minions, I think, that were available to Zhym at that point was Ziliax specifically. So it's a bit of a punish, but I don't think it was incorrect of him at all.
You got your damage in. You're playing an aggressive deck. You're not looking to play around your opponent's singletons.
3-4 Snip Snap.
Yeah, the history buff coming up, pretty reasonably here. I think the other buff going the Mummy or the Golem.
So that Ziliax actually healed Zhym for 8 and removed a minion. That was absolutely crucial. He's rolling into turn 6 at a very healthy life total. Unid, from Zhym's perspective, is running out of resources, but he still is sitting on this Myros Unstable element, which I think will be very crucial for Unid to look for that end game damage. So there's an option for just double Snip Snap here from Zhym.
Yep, Snip Snap just such a good board control tool, but up against a Snip Snap who's doing a little bit of studying. The Restless Mummy is a great removal option, but not necessarily quite so much against these Snip Snaps. You can clear off both front halves and then use the dagger plus the Pharaoh Cat to clean up a couple of these, but will still leave a couple of microbots left over.
There's also this option to just leave up a 3-1 against a 2-3 Snip Snap and not bother with the rest, but I guess you might as well get the rush while it's available there. Alright, so Siamat with Rush and Wind Fury can clear the 3-4 and the 3-2.
I would imagine, you go with Divine Shield Rush, kill the 3-4, then kill the 3-2 with your minions in the board, so you still have a 6-6.
Against 3-1-1s,
yeah,
that's probably a better board state.
Yeah, it's interesting. Zhym is still at a very healthy life total and just picked up Alex Straza. So that does give him some opportunities. He can also just play Twilight Drake plus Frost Nova if he just wants to try and develop a bit more and pin this board down a bit. Definitely debating the options here.
There's also the Rush Wind Fury, and then you leave up 2 1/1s and a 6/2 Siamat, although that doesn't really quite work out anyway because it gets traded on board. So ultimately, the Divine Shield option gives him the best board state at the end. Actually going for Taunt here.
Okay,
It's a bit interesting.
Divine Shield Taunt.
He did see one sap already.
Right, there are 2 saps in
Yeah.
Unid's deck, so this is not a total brick wall. But yeah, this actually does make a great deal of sense in terms of giving Zhym some additional breathing room. If there is no sap here, this is just an absolute brick wall.
Right. The reasoning behind it being that the Rush only actually removes 1 more damage from the board because of the Death Rattle. So he's saying, I'm just going to deal with the Stiff Sap Death Rattle at some other point. And he wrapped Golem coming in as a nice curve play.
Pretty scary. The wrapped Golem
Yeah.
does give Unid a minion that is very difficult for Zhym to remove effectively.
The way it works out is that Zhym essentially needs 2 pings this turn if he wants to deal with this nicely. And a Magic Trick into, I think, Shooting Star would be a great outcome as well.
He does have Frost Nova in hand, so what would he want off Tortolan Pilgrim? He'd probably want, not even, Blizzard is really the only relatively attractive option, I would think.
Instead, gonna start with the Arcane Intellect and the pickup of Ray of Frost.
The Ray of Frost is
amazing.
really good here. The Ray of Frost allows him to shut down that wrapped Golem. It will still be in play and leave another 1/1.
Right. The Scarab 8/6 this turn, that is insane. So history buff and 2 other minions emptying the hand for Myra's Unstable Element. So would you rather have a 4/4 Blink Fox or a 4/3 Fairy Dragon?
I think the buff on the minion that is untargetable is more valuable.
Right.
Spirit of the Dragonhawk does nothing for Unid unless he somehow somehow gets Shadow Form off of a Burglar.
Well, it will get buffed by the Fairy Dragon.
True. Get himself a 1/4 stealth. A monster. Could also play the Spirit of the Dragonhawk now to get the Fairy Dragon bigger, but that doesn't get it out of range of Flame Strike.
Right. Speaking of Flame Strike, that would be quite devastating onto this board,
Ooh,
but Blizzard as well. Oh man.
Blizzard is a really, really good draw here for Zhym. He actually has 10 damage on the board. If you were to just Blizzard attack, then he has Frost Nova. He has several opportunities. He could even just ping Frost Nova, attack face, then Calicos Blizzard the following turn.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like Zhym is in a position where he can just fairly easily set up lethal over the next couple of turns.
This is a very Freeze Mage-like situation. And if he had even more minion development, he could just set up for an Alexstrasza lethal, but this pretty much accomplishes the same thing over 3 turns.
Yeah, and the Myras can find Unid, say an Eviscerate, but that's not by itself enough to take out one of these minions. Deckhand was a nice draw, though.
Right. He can make a 3-attack Deckhand. A little bit short of dealing with Tiamat, and it is damage, so even if a backstab comes off of the Myros, it's going to be a little bit of a question mark. So not even going to bother spending the mana on the Dragonhawk, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
It's important that he's able to actually get something.
Vendettas.
I was going to say, he needs to have the mana to cast something that he gets off this. There's no Eviscerate, but the Vendetta is 0 cost because he saved that Dragonhawk.
He did miss out on Leroy, though, at the very top end, but he still has a fair amount of burst with the double Deadly Poisons and Waggle Pick and the Evil Miscreant.
And crucially, that burst is not stopped by the Frost Nova that Zhym has ready to go.
Exactly. So what is the remaining 3 mana going to be spent on? He's going to go for the Dragon Hop, and I think hoping to land a buff on the Deckhand.
That does leave his Vendetta at 4 mana permanently.
It's a bit curious, right? He could have gone for the clear on this Twilight Drake with the Backstab, Vendetta, and the Deckhand.
Yeah, well, Antonidas plus Frost Nova. And he can actually not attack anything, so there's no ability for Unid to play any sort of charge minion here at all. And this is just setting up lethal.
It is a board lock. And Unid, if he wanted to play a minion, would have to backstab his own either taunt or 2/1. Probably the taunt is more valuable.
Yeah, he can backstab something, but he doesn't have. He just played his deckhand. He doesn't have access to an additional charge minion. He has Backstab Vendetta, but that's not enough to take out the Antonidas here.
He has to remove something, otherwise he's simply dead to double Fireball Ping. So I'm thinking that the turn will involve Blink Fox looking for something.
He can backstab one of his own minions that will at least give him a 1/1 from the Wrapped Golem. But the problem is the 1/1, that needs to absolutely get the job done, right? Like he would just have the 2 taunts and need to kill his opponent the following turn and not die here.
There's a world where he sets up the Waggle Pick and tries to use that to clear the Antonidas, knowing that there's only 1 Fireball in hand.
Sure.
Putting himself at 11 is actually just safe of the Fireball and
but he's taking
of the
fatigue as well.
Oh, right, yeah. And so the ping
it's actually fatiguing for
is not
2.
even necessary. Yeah.
Reno!
Whoa!
Reno!
And it's active with the Vendetta.
I don't think that this is going to be enough. He'd have to actually, this 15. Yeah. This is not a Volcano Reno.
Right, yeah.
It does not kill the Antonidas.
Just short, and that's going to be lethal.
Yeah.
With or without the fatigue, with double Fireball, Zhym manages to take it, identifying that he could just play for consecutive freeze turns.
Right. Yeah, and Zhym just turned into a freeze mage deck there. And we talked about it as soon as we saw Blizzard come off the top of the deck and he had a sizable board presence. And Zhym that game, I think, the thing that mattered the most in terms of his decision-making process was how he played his Tiamat. We were talking, okay, do you rush Wind Fury? Do you rush Divine Shield? He didn't either. Yeah. He just played Divine Shield Taunt, recognizing that put him in a position where he had a great way to both protect himself and his other minions that also gave him a very meaningful threat in the matchup.
It's true. And I would say that ripping the Zephyrus off the top on 2 was also really crucial because not only did it give him stuff to do in the following turn, but it challenged the Fairy Dragon, which you need very correctly point out, especially when he saw that he drew an underbelly fence. Like, both of these players had the curves, and good on them for recognizing just when to go for that crucial Tiamat as well.
Yeah, and this is a really big win for Zhym here because not only is this a tough matchup, but he has a way to improve his deck, swapping into his secondary deck, which adds Flame Ward, Ice Barrier, Bone Wraith, Mossy Horror, and Ancient Mysteries, and gets to remove a lot of his clunkier cards. He gets to remove his Antonidas, Calicos, Puzzle Box, Mountain Giant, like basically all that stuff at the bottom of your deck list that you're like, I really hope I don't draw this against an aggro deck because it's way too expensive. That's gone for defensive tools in these future games.
And speaking of decks that Unique can move on to, though, I don't think he has a side for Mage because the idea is that the primary is supposed to beat Mage in the first place. That's the whole reasoning for bringing Rogue to this tournament, a tournament of this scale in Specialist. He has a side for Warrior, and he has a side for what looks like aggro decks, but I do believe that Unique will be sticking to his guns here. And, if you're going to go about it, I think that this 1-2-3 curve is just good enough, right? Yeah. Especially on the play, the deckhand is much better to play out on turn 1. But Zhym with a Doomsayer, Luna's Pocket Galaxy, and Ooze, and Cartoon Defender. Wow.
Yeah, a lot of good options for both players here. I think the Doomsayer probably a bit more important than anything that Unite has here.
Yeah. So already, crucially, there's a decision of whether you want to coin it out, and he's thinking, okay, so what's the best thing Unite can do on turn 2? And he triple kept, so he could probably expect Fairy Dragon, but he wasn't expecting this backstab.
The deckhand Fairy Dragon backstab into Van Cleef here. This is just brutal.
Truly.
Zhym had his deck's best defensive option on turn 2, and there's.
Wow.
Speaking of defensive options, so Zhym can play the Zephyrus. That can give him a Soulfire to kill the Van Cleef if he wants to play it right now. Just going to go ahead and ping, though, wants to get the deckhand off the board and follow up with Zephyrus for something else later on.
Right. I think
one of the really interesting things about sort of navigating these sort of decks is understanding what Zephyrus will give you in certain spots.
Yeah, right here it could give Eviscerate, I think, to deal with Edwin.
Yep.
Although there's an option for holding it for next turn where he can Zephyrus coin Shadow Madness to deal with 2 minions instead of 1. But
I actually don't believe Shadow Madness is in the pool of cards that Zephyrus offers.
Really?
I know that I've seen lots of screenshots of boards, people like, why didn't it give me Shadow Madness?
Huh.
But it's also possible that it's just the board states in which it offers it are more specific.
Right. The problem with going for the theoretical Shadow Madness, though, is that this turn becomes abysmal if he doesn't play
Right.
Zephyrus. So I think he's absolutely meant to go for it here. Probably just take an Eviscerate.
Don't think he wants the Mountain Giant, I'll tell you that much. One thing I do want to note, I'm actually slightly surprised that Zhym chose to keep the Luna's Pocket Galaxy in his hand. That wasn't something we actually mentioned during the Mulligan phase. That is obviously an extremely powerful card. However, it is a card that is very difficult to find time to play in this particular matchup.
Wow. I'm sorry, look at this hand. Just the spell, Mage Spell Generation in 2 forms.
Well, Mage Spell Generation and Mage Minion Generation, right? There's the... Yeah, he's going to go ahead and Vendetta into the Cyclone.
I think this is absolutely what he's meant to go for. It's just
unexpected
on curve,
results.
Lots of mana cheated out. And more threats.
Yeah, Zhym does have Coin Blizzard if he wants to go for it. But I mean, again, look at this Pocket Galaxy. You know, this is a card he kept in his opening hand, and yes, it is outrageously powerful if you're able to play it on a board state where you're not under significant threat. But when does that happen against this rogue deck?
It is definitely something that in the previous meta, more people would just say, you always keep Pocket Galaxy because the curve was a little bit less consistent from Rogue. But nowadays, Rogue is packing more in the, even in the 1-drop slot. Just the Pharaoh Cats, they're packing the double Fairy Dragon and Underbelly Fences, so yeah.
Not the best spell. Ooh, Magic Trick's going to have to do some magic here.
Or he could go for the Cartoot Defender. It's not really...
Yeah, Cartoot. Yeah. He has seen a Vendetta already. So if there's no sap, Cartoot is great here. Magic Trick, the only real things that you really can get off of Magic Trick that are great here are Frost Nova and Ice Barrier or Flame Ward. None
Flame Ward would have been sick, yeah. I wouldn't have minded a Shooting Star either, just to deal with the 2 1-health minions, but this ain't it, Chief.
Awful. These are really bad.
That means
you can try to unexpected results. If you unexpected results and you get Wild Pyromancer, you can Pyromancer, Frostbolt, and clear most of the board.
That's
you
fun.
could get Taunts. All right, what's in the box? No Wild Pyromancer.
Of substance.
Yeah.
And so gonna push another 10 just from the board.
And there's so much damage from hand in this rogue deck. That's why this deck is so powerful against these mage decks, because yes, they can clear off the board, yes, they can freeze things, but you can't freeze a Wagglepick, you can't freeze a Leroy. This version from Unid, by the way, is a bit different than some of the versions that we have seen. It's not a Hooked Scimitar deck. It does play more board-centric stuff like the History buff, but even then, just the presence of...
Cartoots for everyone.
Yeah.
Although it's not necessarily good here because Unid simply just wants to push the initiative, yet no reason to put this anywhere else but the face, I think.
Oh yeah. Get him.
And very wisely, I think, stacking the Snip Snap so that he saves that 1 board space in case a freeze effect were to come out from Zhym here.
By stacking them too, he also makes himself better against Flame Strike, which it turns out is what Zhym has. Flame Strike will leave still quite a few of these.
Right, 1 damage needed.
1 damage off lethal for Unid here.
And that's
Wagglepick. So
1-1 for the Rogue versus the Mage, the French Mirror, and these players are definitely friends as well. A lot on the line here, as this is an elimination match. Whoever wins this next one goes on to face there's a dead draw for that last spot into the top 4.
And we see Unid there getting a crucially needed win to stay alive in this match. And this is, as you mentioned, a elimination match for both players. The winner will go on to face dead draw in order to find a spot possibly in that top 4 and have a chance to compete for the $100,000 first prize. So a lot on the line for both these players.
And we keep pushing the narrative as well that it's not just the money, but it's also the probability that you can get relegated into GM once you have that higher prize pool of somebody in your region. And the Europe one is, I think, the most stacked as of Vegas because there was a lot of European representation in the top 8 there.
I mean, and frankly, I've heard a lot of people, especially obviously after the results of this tournament, talking about how they feel like France as a country really deserves more representation in Grandmasters, because I mean, just look at this: 4 players in the top 8. Unfortunately for these two, they have to eliminate one another. So definitely a very tough situation for both of them. But we have one more game these players will be playing for a spot to stay alive in this tournament. So don't go anywhere. Masters for Seoul. We'll be right back.